Emilio Estevez says, "We don't think about pilgrimage in this country. We don't think about meditation. And the idea of taking a 6-week walk is totally foreign to most North Americans. But it's probably exactly what we need." Emilio directed the documentary film The Way that stars his father, Martin Sheen. And without giving too much away, it's the story of a man who embarks on a historical pilgrimage, the very Camino that I'm going to talk about. And he does this to honor his son's desire to finish the journey. And what he doesn't plan on is the profound impact that the journey would have on him. Having a tendency to overextend myself with every commitment that I make, my family, friends, and clients had been telling me to slow down. And a part of me had yearned for an extended period of solitude away from the familiar routines and demands. And it was 5 years ago that something drew my daughter Pam and I to the 800-kilometer Camino de Santiago in Spain. We traveled as pilgrims for 5 weeks, and my only possessions rested in this backpack. For me, this was to be a journey to find myself, to realign my goals, and to examine the priorities that I had allowed to define my life. Walking is a spiritual practice, and in walking toward myself, I searched my soul for answers, healed past hurts, and moved forward towards my future. Our destination was the 9th century Santiago Cathedral. It's a UNESCO World Heritage Site that seats 1,000 people and where the remains of the Apostle St. James are reportedly buried. What was an ancient trade route, the Way of St. James or the Camino de Santiago, is today one of the world's most beautiful and busiest pilgrimages. Centuries ago, pilgrims traveled on foot for religious reasons. But today, people of all ages and nationalities make this journey for a variety of reasons. Some to discover new friendships, others to deepen existing bonds, meditate, get fit, and to explore history and culture. It's interesting that as many churches struggle with diminishing congregations, pilgrimages are actually increasing. Western Europe has over 6,000 pilgrimage sites that are drawing as many as 100 million people a year. In the holy year of 2004, 180,000 pilgrims walked the Camino. And 1 year later, there were 250,000. And the numbers are increasing every year. It's no coincidence that this is happening at a time of deep spiritual longing in society. Our society is wrought with people who are frantic and frazzled. People sleep less and work more. Families eat together less and less, and people are eating on the run. Technology actually makes us busier, and multitasking leaves us unaware of what goes on within or around us. The wilderness author Sigurd Olsen wrote these insightful words a half-century ago. There is a restlessness within us, an impatience with things as they are, which modern life with its comforts and distractions doesn't seem to satisfy. We sense intuitively that there must be something more, and yet we fill our days and nights with such activity and our minds with such busyness that there's little time to think. And when the pace stops, we're often lost. And so we plunge once more into the maelstrom, hoping that if we move fast enough, somehow we may fill the void within us. Yearning seekers ask themselves the most basic and most important questions. Who am I? What is the meaning of life? And what is my purpose? I had a lot of time to think about those questions. That's what's one of the many benefits of walking. And it also allows one time to reflect on the past, to be fully aware in each moment, and to experience things that you might not otherwise encounter. Several years ago, I read Ken Follett's Pillars of the Earth, which describes how the very cathedrals along the way were built. I also read the Brazilian author Paulo Coelho's The Pilgrimage and the American actress Shirley MacLaine's The Camino. And in her book, she wrote, "The road is the pilgrimage of he who wishes to walk by himself until he finds himself." And it was this one line that drew me to the Camino. I had to hear what it was trying to tell me, even if at times I grew fearful of what I might learn. For it's been my experience that journeys rarely take us where we think we're going. In preparation for the journey, I walked from 5 to 15 kilometers almost every day for 8 months. I was determined to be ready for the physical challenge ahead of me. But from the start, it was hard work. The 24 hours of travel included a transatlantic flight from Hamilton to London, another flight from London to Biarritz, France, and a 30-minute bus ride. On the final leg, the 1-hour train ride to the charming little French town of Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port showed us the foothills of the Pyrenees, and the reality of my impending journey hit me. My companions, fear and doubt, would patiently await me, waiting to get me alone, waiting to begin our walk. And in the meantime, we arrived late in the evening, tired and hungry, too tired to eat, and there was a 6-hour time difference. We stayed at a private home with 3 bedrooms, stacked with bunk beds, and this woman was an entrepreneur. That's what she did. She accepted pilgrims every single night. And at 5:30 the next morning, the other pilgrims in our room were standing beside our beds, getting dressed in the dark and packing. They were actually getting ready to walk in the dark. And without even considering a day to acclimatize and rest, we followed suit. It is said by many that once you take your first step on the Camino, the road before you will be forever changed. I would say that there are few events that change one's life as deeply as a sacred pilgrimage. It is a journey that recharges the spirit and brings clarity to one's relationship with the cosmos. This was most definitely a defining experience in my life. Day 1 is a 27.7 kilometer trek up and over the Pyrenees Mountains, and it ends in Roncesvalles, Spain. One of the guidebooks calls Day 1 Baptism by Fire. Now, I know you can't see this very well, but there is another one at the back at the display. But this is an elevation map from a German guidebook, and just look at the straight up and the straight down. Saint Jean is right here where we started. Orisson is your last place where you either make the commitment or you stop before you make the trek up. Some pilgrims have to stop at Orisson because of very dense hill fog. Once it's clear, you start, and you climb to 1,450 meters, and then there's a very steep descent into Roncesvalles, or Roncesvalles in French. Jet-lagged and walking uphill with an 18-pound backpack literally felt like we were walking with our noses to the ground. And as fatigue set in, we found that frequent stops became a necessity, and they were taking longer and longer. I found myself having to stop every few feet just to catch my breath. And in the first hour, I had a major blister forming on my heel. Remember, I told you I walked for 8 months? Not one blister. Every step became one of endurance, and as I limped along, the more I walked, the more difficult it became, and my mind began to work against me. It was really easy to become discouraged by the view ahead. My inner critic's voice got louder, and I began to doubt myself. What were you thinking? This is an insane idea to walk across Spain. I began to doubt my intentions and that I'd ever even finish the walk. And by now, I had been walking 7 hours in my socks because the blister had torn and the pressure on my heel was unbearable. My feet were so hot and sweaty in my boots that bandages and moleskin wouldn't stay in place. I found myself sitting on the edge of a mountain feeling very lost and alone. And I was giving serious thought to abandoning the journey when out of nowhere, 3 eagles came flying directly at me. I sat there in speechless awe and wonder, gazing up at their wingspans of between 8 and 10 feet wide. And they were so close, not even 20 feet away, that I could hear their wings. And I'm getting goosebumps remembering. All eagles are sacred. Their message is to believe in your higher self, to feel the freedom found in oneness, and to let your spirit soar. Native people believe that it is upon their great wings that all wishes and prayers are taken to the Great Spirit. Those eagles continued to circle and soar above us for several minutes. And when I've told the story before, there are always the skeptics that have claimed that they were probably just sizing us up for a meal. But I knew without a doubt that this awesome Trinity was a message that we were not alone. And I went from complete despair and exhaustion to excitement and exhilaration in a matter of moments. Their appearance inspired me to get up and keep going, and our hearts swelled with the absolutely breathtaking views as we climbed to 1,450 meters. And for the rest of the day, those 3 eagles kept us in their sight, carrying us through the Pyrenees. That was our first Camino moment, and it was to be the first of many. Feet get a lot of attention on the Camino. Pilgrims discuss socks and footwear like we talk about the weather. It wasn't uncommon to talk about sprains or aches and pains and blisters while sharing a meal. And in most restaurants, pilgrims casually pull off muddy shoes and smelly socks and very matter-of-factly examine their aching feet while eating. The rules are different on the Camino. I didn't have an easy road to travel. Despite my diligent training and my foot care, my feet became very badly blistered and calloused. My body was demanding that I slow down. Slow down? If we slow down anymore, Mom, we'll stop. And stop we did, as infected blisters grounded me for 4 days. And blistered feet turned out to be a blessing. It bestowed me with idle time that forced me inward. People speak of the Camino mystically. It will teach you what you need to know and surfaces what you must face. To rest or recoup was almost too much to bear. I came to realize that I had bought into the illusion that to be worthy in society is to be productive. I was so frustrated when I couldn't join the pilgrims each day as they left in the morning, and I felt really guilty holding up Pam, but she refused to leave me behind. I had to talk myself into doing absolutely nothing. In the end, I learned that obstacles are the path. They're not in our way except our own projections of fear when we live in the future and not in the present moment. Several mornings I had to overcome inner resistance and engage in the day's difficult challenges once more. There were many mornings I faced the ache of muscles over and over again, and at times the road looked tiresomely long. Some stretches of the path are so intense and demanding and challenging that you need your entire focus just to put one foot in front of the other. And sometimes there was anxiety at seeing the next day's route in the guidebook. Another mountain to climb. I actually lost sleep over it, only to discover the next day that we would walk around it. In Miles to Go, Richard Evans said that there was a mountain in myself that I had to conquer. These moments in our lives are our finest hours. Without great mountains, we cannot reach great heights. And we were born to reach great heights. Every day also had unforeseen blessings filled with grace and humility. Now, it's easy at the journey's beginning to be overwhelmed at the thought of walking 800 kilometers. But when you remember Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s advice, take the first step in faith. You don't have to see the whole staircase, just the first step. These words help me envision the more manageable daily cross of 20 to 25 kilometers. That was doable, and that we did day after day, step by step. So too with our own problems and goals in life. When we break them down into manageable chunks, we're often amazed by what we can accomplish. I also never really thought about my body with respect until this journey. But now I have a new understanding of the metaphor of the body as a temple. When we restarted, I set a new intent to practice mindfulness, to decide each hour and each day what I'd do and where I'd go. Self-care became essential. I learned to listen to my body, to eat when I felt hungry, to rest when I needed to, and to continue my foot care. The Camino whispered to me in countless ways, "Don't go back to sleep." And indeed, I would not. I remained awake, aware, and alert to what it had to tell me. We climbed mountains, wandered through valleys, vineyards, olive groves, fields of freshly cut bales of straw that were stacked several stories high, and asparagus plantations shrouded in plastic because apparently most Europeans don't like it green, and it keeps it white. We strolled in the sunshine and trudged in drenching rain. We walked through hamlets and we entered big and bustling cities whose noise absolutely overwhelmed us after days of rural solitude. We'd start out before sunrise when we could still see our breath, and as the heat would build later in the day, everything began to take more effort. And as the rest of Spain was taking afternoon siesta, the pilgrims would soldier on. We followed a variety of markers, the most common ones being the yellow arrow or the scallop shell. They would be painted on signs, rocks, trees, curbs, houses, fences, and on the cobblestone. And on the Camino, as in life, we had to keep paying attention, especially in the cities where the yellow arrows competed with other signage and neon lights and could sometimes be difficult to find. And yet, whenever we felt lost, we had only to ask the local people, "¿Dónde está el camino?" And they would enthusiastically point the way. Over and over, the Camino taught me to trust that the universe provides what I truly need. We had heard before we went that it could get so busy that the hostels would become overcrowded and pilgrims would actually race each other to the next shelter. Some were crowded, but we never had a problem finding a bed. And surprisingly, most hostels were tidy and well kept in spite of the daily turnover of peregrinos. That's the Spanish for pilgrims. They're constantly arriving and departing, and we seldom saw a serious disagreement. Yes, sometimes occasional annoyances and irritations, but our overall experience was very positive. But this success cannot be taken for granted, for the intense pilgrim life had plenty of potential for conflict and problems. We would share close space every single night. Often there'd only be one toilet and shower for dozens of people. Every day, most of us did our wash by hand, and there might only be 1 or 2 laundry tubs for over 100 people. And it was hard to keep them well maintained and clean, and some weren't as hygienic as some would prefer. And while we were careful with our possessions, there were times that it was just impossible to keep everything safe and secure at all times. The Camino is a place of frequent coincidence and synchronicity. Time and again, I was struck by some seemingly small decision that led to meeting the very people I most needed to see, the ones the universe wanted me to encounter. Ponder the synchronicities in your own life. Such coincidences are said to point to the rightness of your path, and it will feel as if you are exactly where you need to be. The most special thing about the Camino is the people, the camaraderie of pilgrims, the hospitality of the hospitaleros, who were the hosts in the hostels, and the kindness of the local people. We knew nationalities, discussed each other's reasons for walking, and our Camino lessons before we ever knew each other's names. A sense of community developed very quickly among the hikers. Help was often offered and received. And without the distractions of electronic gadgets and technology, we were engaged daily in open, honest, and authentic conversation with the people that we would meet. Simple gestures meant so much. While passing each other or saying goodbye to another pilgrim, we'd wish one another Buen Camino, which translated from Spanish means good way. In contrast today, so many of us live privately. We're isolated and cut off from one another. Instead of front porches for visiting with neighbors and passers-by, our backyard decks are sheltered behind privacy fences. We seldom go for neighborhood strolls, but instead we're in our cars. And we grow impatient with slower drivers or those who hesitate a second too long at stoplights. Since I've returned home, I find myself more deliberate about choosing when to drive and when to walk. I was really shocked to find the statistic that Americans walk just a few hundred yards a day, or less than 1.5 miles a week. The world looks and feels different on foot than when you're in a vehicle. When you're walking, you take in everything and you enjoy the scenery. Walking for me is a way to notice. It's a way to be in nature and not just passing through it. Nature can be one of our greatest teachers. And even in the city, I see so much more if I walk. And remember, when you're rushing, you're not walking. Walking mindfully is a spiritual practice. The Vietnamese Buddhist monk Thich Nhat Hanh says, "Not only walking on water is a marvel, even walking on the earth is a miracle." On the Camino, the land itself is the cathedral, and worship isn't confined to 4 walls. Each step is a prayer, and every breath is a song of gratitude. Daily life ought to be done in a pilgrim spirit, to proceed at a different pace and to walk unhurried and thoughtfully, to disconnect from TV, the internet, and cell phones, and to live in the spirit of oneness and openness. I wonder how well that would go over if I tried to say that in the middle of Union Station in morning rush hour. Living out of a backpack for 5 weeks convinced us that we can exist more simply. As we walked, we became very discerning about what we carried. And we often felt conflicted about possessions, and we pondered and struggled with ways to live in our consumer and materialistic society. Life is very simple as a pilgrim. At the end of the day, we'd find ourselves grateful for the absolute most basic things: the kindness of strangers, a shower, a meal, and a bed. Even if that bed was only a thin mat on a church floor, or on a top bunk that was only 6 inches from the one that was next to you, in a dormitory that was filled with 100 bunk beds. Earplugs were absolutely essential, or you'd be awake half the night with the snoring, the symphony of snoring pilgrims. I leave you with one final story that illustrates how many guides come to us in different guises. The key is to be awake and pay attention. One early morning, a little black dog leapt out of the bushes alongside the path to greet us. He was friendly, and his tail was wagging, and his ears were sticking up in a half-cocked kind of manner, and he was skin and bones. You could actually see the outline of every rib he had. And he was scratching constantly, for he was flea-infested. We affectionately named him Pointed Ears, and we found to our delight that he actually responded to our basic Spanish commands. That dog would walk with us for 4 days, and we never once heard him bark. He would continually run ahead several yards as if he were scouting out the trail, and he'd always turn around to see us if we were following, and he'd run back to herd us, and he'd always circle me and nudge me in the hip as if he was encouraging me along. And that dog would faithfully wait outside when we'd go in somewhere to eat and when we stopped for the night at a hostel. And every single morning for 4 mornings, he'd be waiting outside for us as we came out of the hostel, as we ventured out for the next day's walk. And sometime during day 3, I said to Pam that while he was bringing us great joy and companionship, I felt that he was traveling with us for another purpose. And we found out why the next day. Early one morning, we found ourselves, and it was a misty, foggy morning, we found ourselves at a footbridge that was almost 800 meters long and very narrow. The railing was much lower than normal, giving us a very full view of the mighty river Torre below. The floorboards looked like steel planks, and they were warped in places. And we found ourselves standing back and wondering if it was actually safe to even cross. But it was clearly marked with a yellow arrow. There was nobody else around to consult, and so Pam started marching confidently across the bridge. And Pointed Ears and I stood on firm ground watching her. I was absolutely paralyzed with fear. She got about a third of the way across the bridge and realized that her footsteps were the only ones she heard, and so she turned around and retraced her steps. A fear of heights and bridges was a metaphor for how I had lived my life. Fears that I had hidden behind a stoic facade all came cascading out. Feel the fear and do it anyway. And so the 3 of us crossed the bridge together. Pointed Ears was glued to my left thigh, matching my shuffling baby steps that I took hesitatingly. I was terrified and needy, and Pam was calm and caring, offering guidance and encouragement. When we got to the other side, I was emotionally and physically exhausted, and we still had 18 kilometers to walk to our day's destination. And it was amazing as we sat there for a few moments resting. The fog lifted, and there before our eyes was a road that we could have taken around that bridge. The next day, Pointed Ears was gone. We asked several people if they had seen him, but it was as if he had just vanished into thin air. We need pilgrimages in our lives, journeys that restore our faith. And while walking the Camino may not be a desire or an option for everyone, its lessons can be learned in the pilgrimage of life. Travel makes pilgrims of us all, for we don't know what we're going to discover in our journeys about our destinations or ourselves. That is the adventure. Obstacles and setbacks are almost inevitable, but there's no need to lose heart. Just let those very obstacles give you strength, and grace and humility will carry you through the mountains and valleys. My Camino journey was a path of heart. I carry very many beautiful memories in my heart, along with the many lessons that I learned, and they'll last a lifetime. It was the most wonderful and wonder-filled 5 weeks of my life, and I was very grateful to have shared it with my daughter. And even now, I understand that it's still likely going to take me many years to unpack and integrate it all. It may have been very hard, but it was the hard that made it incredibly good. The work is not done, and the Camino is calling me to return, for it is said that once you've made your first pilgrimage, you're always between pilgrimages. Life is a journey. Wear comfortable shoes and get used to the sound when Camino, for it can be a beautiful journey. Thank you.